YN could feel that all too familiar pressure building inside of them, like a balloon slowly inflating their chest, and they couldn't hold it in anymore. It was becoming harder to breathe. The vision was getting a little blurry, and the noise in the classroom felt all too loud, too close. Their hands were trembling as they clenched the edge of the desk, willing themselves to stay calm, but the panic was creeping in faster than they could handle it. They didn't want to disrupt class, but they couldn't just stay here. Not like this. YN took a slow breath, trying to steady themselves, and then lifted their hand, eyes already darting to the side where Mr. Aizawa was watching the class with his usual unreadable expression. "Mr. Aizawa?" they whispered, their voice shaking. Their words felt thick in their throat as they forced themselves to speak. Can I leave for a moment?" Mr. Aizawa's sharp eyes immediately met theirs, his gaze softened just a fraction, a silent acknowledgement that he understood what was going on. He'd seen it before, the way YN's anxiety would flare up out of nowhere, and the panic would overtake them. He nodded, a subtle gesture that he didn't attract the attention from the rest of the class. "Go on," Mr. Aizawa said quietly, his voice calm but firm. "Take care of yourself." YN didn't need any more encouragement. Without another word, they stood up, the classroom falling away as they hurried towards the door. As they stepped into the hallway, the world around them seemed to narrow. When they stepped out to the hallway, the world around them seemed to narrow. Every step felt heavier. Their heart was racing, pounding against their chest, as if trying to break free. The pressure behind their eyes was mounting, and they could feel the panic bubbling to the surface. They barely made it to the bathroom before it all hit them. The room spun and they staggered towards the sink, gripping the counter as they tried to steady themselves. A quiet sob escaped their throat as they doubled over, the weight of the anxiety crushing them. The bathroom creaked open, and YN stifled. A voice, gruff and familiar, called out to them. "Oi, YN, you good?" It was Bakugo. YN felt a rush of irritation flood through them, but it was quickly replaced by dread. They didn't want anyone to see them like this, especially not Bakugo. He'd never understand. He'd probably just call them weak and tell them to get it together. But Bakugo didn't shout at them. He didn't demand anything. Instead, he walked closer, the heavy sound of his boots echoing off the tile floor. YN wanted to hide, to shrink away from the raw vulnerability that was overtaking them, but they couldn't move. The anxiety held them in their place, a vice tightening around their chest. "Shut up, I'm fine," YN tried to force out, but their voice cracked halfway through. Bakugo grunted, his footsteps nearing. "Yeah, doesn't sound like it," he muttered, more to himself than them. He was close now, standing next to them, but he didn't touch them. He didn't invade their space, he simply stood there, watching them with intense golden eyes. His usual scowl softened just a bit as he crossed his arms. "YN," Bakugo said, his voice a little gentler than usual, but still rough around the edges. "Breathe. You gotta breathe. Alright?" YN's hands were shaking. They could feel the tears starting to spill over, but they shook their head. The urge to be left alone was almost overpowering. But something about Bakugo's presence kept them rooted in the spot. "I can't," they managed out. Their breath was shallow and rapid, the panic overwhelming every thought they tried to form. "It's too much." "Yeah, I get it," Bakugo replied for a moment. YN thought he might just turn around and leave them alone to suffer through it, but instead, he let out a heavy sigh. "Look, you just gotta focus, alright? On me. Just listen to me. You're fine. You're here. You're breathing. Breathe with me. In and out. Just like that." YN didn't think they could do it. They didn't think they could follow the instructions, especially when their chest felt like it was gonna cave in, but after, Bakugo stayed right there. A few seconds later, his steady breathing filled the space around them. "Come on, YN," he said, his voice low but insistent. "You don't need to do this alone. Breathe. Focus on me." YN couldn't speak. They didn't know what to say. All they could do was focus on the rhythm of Bakugo's breathing matching theirs as best they could. Slowly the pressure in their chest began to ease, but it wasn't gone. It was still there hovering, but it seemed to recede for now. Better? Bakugo asked, his eyes watching them intently. Lion nodded. The movement was small, but enough to acknowledge that they weren't completely drowning anymore. But the relief was temporary. Fleeting, they could still feel the anxiety lingering, threatening to come back with the slightest wrong move. Lion started. Their voice trembling again. But they didn't know what to say. They felt like they were still on the edge, like one wrong thing would send them right back in their chaos, would fill their mind again. Bakugo didn't say anything at first. He just kind of stood there watching them. Then after a long moment, he took a deep breath. You don't gotta be so damn stubborn, he muttered, crossing his arms again, his usual gruffness creeping back into his tone. But you don't have to do this by yourself. Not if I'm here. Lion wasn't sure how to respond. The words didn't come easy, but they didn't have to, because for the first time in a long time they weren't alone. Bakugo stayed with them, his presence grounding them even when they couldn't quite get their mind to calm down completely. And maybe they'd be okay. But as they turned to leave, the bathroom door swung shut behind them. Lion's heart raced still. The weight of it was pressing on their chest, but Bakugo was there, at least for now. And that didn't mean the panic was gone, but maybe it was enough to make it stop a little bit. Lion leaned heavily against the bathroom sink, their hands gripping the edges as they tried to steady their breathing. Their chest was tight, and the mind was like spiraling. The anxiety was relentless, tightening its grip around their chest and pushing them towards a breakdown. They couldn't let it get that far, not here, not now. The bathroom door creaked open again, and Lion's heart skipped a beat. They quickly wet their face, not wanting anyone to see how much they were struggling. But the person who stepped in wasn't just anyone. Bakugo's sharp eyes immediately scanned the room, landing on them. It was another day, but they were in the same position that they were in a day previous. His furrowed brows landed on them. He took the inside of Lion, breathless and shaking, and didn't need to ask what was going on. He already knew. Lion had been dealing with these anxiety attacks for a while now, and he hated to see them, but he didn't really know how else to help. The hell's wrong with you? He grunted, his usual bluntness taking over. He leaned across the door frame, his arms crossed tightly over his chest as he glared at them, as though there was something soft, almost concerned in his golden eyes. Lion winced at his words, unsure of how to answer. They wanted to tell him that it was just an anxiety attack, that there was nothing he needed to worry about, that he didn't have to keep helping them. But the words felt stuck. They hated feeling weak. They hated the way their anxiety took over their mind, making them feel so helpless. I don't know, Lion finally muttered, voice shaky. It's everything. It feels like it's too much. It won't stop. I can't breathe. Bakugo's gaze softened for a second, though his usual tough exterior didn't break. You're just gonna let it control you? He said, his voice was low but not unkind. You're not weak, so stop trying to act like it. Lion blinked in surprise, their eyes meeting his. The words caught them off guard. Bakugo wasn't known for being overly considerate, but there was something about his tone now that made him pause and rethink the situation. You don't get it, Lion whispered, the voice trembling. You just don't get it. It's not that simple. It's like my body won't listen. I can't stop it. Every time I try to focus, it just gets worse. Bakugo snorted, clearly not satisfied with their explanation. Well, I don't know what the hell you're talking about, but I do know that you're not doing this alone, so get it together, damn it. Lion's chest tightened further at his harsh words, but they didn't feel as cutting as they usually did. There was no mocking, no teasing, just concern. For the first time, Bakugo seemed like he was trying to understand. Lion cleared their throat before speaking. I don't know how, Lion admitted, their voice barely above a whisper. Bakugo stared at them for the moment, letting out a long sigh. Running a hand through his spiky blonde hair, he muttered under his breath something unintelligible. But then Lion's shock took over when he walked over to them. You're really a pain in the ass, he grumbled, but there was no heat. Instead, he reached out and gently placed his hand on their shoulder. Listen, if you don't need to do this by yourself. I'm not good at this kind of thing, but if you're gonna act like an idiot and keep this crap bottled up, I'm not gonna let you. Ryan looked at him in disbelief. Bakugo Katsuki actually trying to help. Why do you care? They said, almost unbelievable. Bakugo's lips pressed into a tight line. He didn't immediately respond. Instead, he just shook his head. I don't want you to have to go through this on your own, and I won't let this get worse. Ryan blinked at him, still unsure what to say. But I don't know how to make it stop. You don't have to make it stop, Bakugo replied gruffly. You have to deal with it. It doesn't go away, and you're going to learn how to fight it, and you're not going to fight it by shutting everyone out. Ryan felt a wave of emotion flood them. Relief, gratitude, but also something else, something they hadn't realized they were feeling. But I'm scared, they admitted, the vulnerability slipping out before they could stop it. Bakugo's expression softened, but his usual scowl didn't disappear completely. He took a step closer, lowering his voice. I get it. Being scared's normal, but that doesn't mean you're alone, Ryan. I'm here. The tension in Ryan's chest loosened just a bit, the weight of their anxiety feeling like maybe it was more manageable in the moment. Maybe Bakugo didn't have all the answers, but he was trying, more than they ever thought he would. How do I stop? How do I stop it from feeling so overwhelming? Ryan asked quietly, their voice still unsteady. Bakugo took a big, deep breath and sighed, running a hand over his face. Alright. First things first, focus on your breathing. In and out, nice and slow. You gotta reset your damn head. Then when that's done, just keep talking. I don't care what about, it just helps to get your mind off it. Ryan had done what he instructed, breathing deeply and steadily. The panic didn't vanish completely, but with Bakugo calming down their presence, it started to fade into the background. They took a big, deep breath, feeling a little bit more control. Better? Bakugo asked, his voice softer now, almost hesitant. Yeah, Ryan whispered, the words coming out easier now. A little better. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Ryan's heart was still racing, but Bakugo's presence kept them grounded. They felt like they could actually breathe again, not just because they followed his advice, but because of the way he had stayed with them. As they looked at Bakugo, something shifted between them. The tension from earlier was still there, but it was different now. Not just because of the anxiety, but because something had changed, the way they saw him change into something more. Bakugo hesitated, his gaze locking with Ryan's. His eyes softened for a little bit. For the briefest moment, the wall he had kept up around himself cracked. He leaned in almost instinctively and pressed a gentle kiss to Ryan's forehead. Ryan froze, their breath catching in their throat. They didn't know what to say. They didn't know how to process the sudden rush of feelings that washed over them. Bakugo pulled back, his expression guarded, but there was something vulnerable beneath his eyes now. You're not alone, Ryan. He muttered, his voice not even above a whisper. Not now. Not ever. Ryan blinked, suddenly overwhelmed with the sudden shift, but the weight of the words stayed with them, filling the empty spaces in their mind where the doubt used to be. They didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, they felt like maybe everything was going to be okay. And maybe for now that was enough.